What's going on, everybody? And welcome to Let's Talk Draft. I'm here with my good friend Frankie Abbott.
How's it going, people?
Yes, you can follow him at Frankie Films. Please give him a follow. He's always tweeting, always giving you that film. He lives up to his name. He definitely lives up to his name. But Frankie, how are you doing today, my man?
Doing pretty well. As I was telling you before the podcast started, just got some Sonic. Hit the spot pretty good. I got a chili cheese dog, which was pretty delicious, and some French toast sticks, which, doesn't have any relevancy to what we're going to be talking about on the podcast, but my stomach's pretty happy, so it's going to be a good podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. I have a lot going on with work right now, but I'm going up to the mountains this weekend with Zach and Bree, which will be fun. Good little getaway. Going to just discuss some pod news, some exciting stuff coming up. There's some exciting stuff even coming up for the Let's Talk Draft. We're always moving. We're always trying to make things shake. So it's going to be good. But this is going to be a fun episode. I'm excited for this one. We're going to be discussing what the differences are from last year's Broncos unit to this year's Broncos unit, and who's actually better. Which unit did you like better going into the season is the way I'm looking at it, Frankie. But first, I think it's important we run through some Broncos news, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. It's big week. We got the owners' meetings are going on. We got some rule changes happening. Pro days are taking place, and yeah.
Yes, sir. Let's go. Let's start off with this. Since the last time we talked, the Broncos signed Marquez Callaway to a 1-year deal. I like this signing, Frankie. I think it's a very low-risk, high-reward signing. I'm going to hate it if it ends up replacing one of the wide receivers, if that was the reason why they added it. But as it stands right now, it looks just like a really, really good depth signing. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on it?
Sneaky, really solid signing, like you're saying. I really like him as one of these Sean Payton big slot options, power slot options. Kind of like, to me, what he gives such a great option for is if Tim Patrick starts the season, he's not 100%, and I hope he will be, but, coming off an ACL tear, you never know. You don't necessarily have to be forcing him to play, every single snap. Or maybe, he's not ready to come back week 1, and you want to maybe give him an extra little bit of time to come back. Marquez Callaway, I think, can fill that role really well. I was really excited to see the stuff he was doing in 2021, where he was a pretty solid receiver for Sean Payton. He was a decent red zone weapon, pretty decent over the middle, and just a really solid receiver and guy I liked a lot. So I think it was a sneaky good move.
Frankie, I'm right in the same boat with you. First, what's up, D Bronx? How's it going? I'm happy to see you in the chat again, man. But yeah, no, I'm right in the same boat with you. It just seems like a good signing. As it stands right now, I mean, it could definitely change. Like I said, if the Broncos plan on replacing Courtland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy with Marquez Callaway, it's a little more worrisome than it is right now. Right now, It just looks like, hey, the Broncos wide receivers have been beat up a ton. They need depth, right? How many times these last years – I mean, I won't forget. Who was the wide receiver they picked up 2 years ago, mid-year? John Brown. They picked up John Brown mid-season to go in there and produce, and he had to step in right away, and it didn't work out. There's been multiple guys like that. They also picked up a wide receiver from Seattle at the time. I'm forgetting his name, who came in, and he didn't produce like we wanted him to. It's just, hey, if the Broncos are planning to just add depth to the room, you love it. You love it. They didn't sign him to a huge deal. It's not a huge investment. It just feels like high reward, low risk. So yeah, let's move on though. Sean Payton is playing his starters in the preseason this year, unlike Hackett, right? And it always feels like he's throwing shade.
Oh yeah, he was dumping all over last year's entire coaching staff and seemingly some of the players too. I mean, he seemed over the last year's shit, so it's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And what's going on, Paul? How's it going?
How is it, Paul?
But yeah, he's always just shitting on the Hackett. It feels like he does not care about what Hackett has going on. He's gonna do it his way, and then he's gonna let people know that I don't agree with what Hackett was doing. So he's playing his starters this preseason. Do you think that is better than not playing them?
So it's interesting to see, it's hilarious kind of watching the fan opinion over the past couple of years because obviously, with Vic, everyone was like, oh, we need to stop playing everybody so much. We're enduring too many injuries. And then last year happened, it was like, oh, it's because we're not playing anybody in the preseason. So I generally do kind of lean a little bit more towards precaution in the preseason. I don't love playing every game. I do think that you should kind of give them those I don't know, those pre-reps, give them maybe like 15 snaps in the final game or something to kind of get them ready. But, to each their own, kind of do it how you will, as long as the new strength and conditioning coaches and staff that he's bringing in is doing their job and getting them all ready. I hope it won't be too big of a problem, but it is kind of one of those things that'll be interesting because like God forbid, but it's one of those things where like if an injury does take place, you do wonder if the fan opinion will switch back the other way. Like, why are we playing these guys in the preseason? We just lost, so and so to an
It's going to take one injury.
Right, exactly. That's all it's going to take, and then it's going to be all hell's going to break loose, And as we're going to touch on later with this roster, not a lot of depth if an injury takes place to really any position on the entire team. So
totally, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Frankie. I do hope that they play a little bit. I don't know, maybe I'm a little old school on that I just think that they need that time to adjust. I really do. Like, you're adding all these new players. And in the Broncos scenario, Russell Wilson wasn't good last year. He's under a new head coach this year and a new offense. Hey, get some reps in. But I could be a hypocrite because if a player does get hurt, I'm going to be yelling about it.
Everyone will be,
I don't care. Yeah, I know.
That's the fun part of our job, though. We're not putting anything on the line.
1,000%. These are just kind of rapid fire news, so I'm going to move on to the next one here. Sean Payton and George Payton kind of shut the door on all the Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton trade rumors. Do you actually believe that to be fact, or do you think that they could still be traded?
I think I do on Jeudy. I think that they are solid on Jerry Jeudy. I really hope so. I might end up eating those words, and I'll be really sad. I think they could still end up moving Courtland Sutton. The Marquez Callaway move kind of makes me think that, but I think I really hope they want to keep Jerry Jeudy, man. I think that's the biggest part of it, but it feels like it again. And I think this is the biggest thing to me. And I've kind of mentioned this before with other players getting left, but like at this point, it's kind of like the core player thing where it's like, how many times can we hear George Payton heavily back a player and then instantly move off of him like a couple months later? Like, that has to have a negative effect on the locker room, man. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm completely mistaken and the players are like, who cares? But like, dude, if your boss was like, I don't know. It's a weird thing to me that like he seems to constantly be like, oh, we really like this player. This guy is going to be a huge part of our future. And then a couple months later, they seem to not care about that player and move off of them. If they move off Jerry Jeudy or Courtland Sutton, this would be the third time that happens. So, it can all be talk and that's all well and good, but I wouldn't like if that happens. So I'm going to go with, hopefully this is the end of it. What do you think?
Frankie, I'm a little more pessimistic here. I won't lie. I'm a little more pessimistic than you. I don't want the Broncos to trade Jerry Jeudy. I do not want the Broncos to trade Courtland Sutton either. To me, Frankie, this feels like a room they should be adding on to. It doesn't feel like a room that they should be selling at. I don't think they're deep enough to sell at. I just don't. I think Jerry Jeudy's going to come into his own. I feel like you're selling Courtland Sutton right now at his lowest point. I just wouldn't do it. But with that being said, the rumors are still swirling. The Broncos still had them out for offer. It really feels like to me that no one was willing to come up to the asking price that they wanted. And hey, injuries happen. All different type of things happen in the NFL. Situations change. And I still think that a team might just reach that price. That first round pick you were talking about with Jerry Jeudy earlier this offseason? Are you still down to do that? I could see that call coming in after an injury. Or maybe just after, a past team they added Juju. They still haven't gotten much better outside of that yet. Towards when it actually starting to happen and we're seeing these players actually in training camp or something like that, why can't a trade happen? I think it's still very possible. I was even looking back at prior Sean Payton's trade. He traded Brandon Cooks at almost the exact same time that Jerry Jeudy is in right now. It was the exact same time. It was going into his fourth season. And those picks ended up working out pretty good for Sean Payton that time around. I won't lie, but it's the draft. I'm not going to sit here. It is very, very, so much luck is involved with it to me. So I could see it happening still, and I'm not going to like it. That's kind of where I stand on that one. And it freaks me out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, it'll be very interesting to see how they handle the 5th-year option. They still haven't picked that up. So Paul makes a good point in the chat. He says weak wide receiver draft. And I think that's a completely great point where, I think that there's a very real possibility that we're going to see one of these teams that's, hoping to maybe make a deeper push into the playoffs, recognize that the immediate value of a Jerry Jeudy is just greater than the pick that you can make at 20 through 32, So I think I completely agree where it would make sense. I think I'm just still leaning into the very much that I hope not. So I don't think that they're going to do it. Like you said, they need to add to the room. I don't think it really benefits them much. I don't think a team's going to be willing to give up a next year first, if anything. And I guess one thing I'd say about the news continuing to swirl is I think it's just a big thing is a lack of news right now. It seems like, there's a lot of pause with the Aaron Rodgers and Lamar Jackson situation for actual news to kind of come out, where the Jerry Jeudy thing is kind of like a known thing that I don't think is going anywhere. And I think that these places can kind of keep saying oh, teams are still calling about Jerry Jeudy and no one's met the offer without it being wrong or speculation or anything, but they don't really have much else to say. So I think that could also be playing part of it as well.
Okay. Well, I'm going to hit one more news point. Peyton was super complimentary of Jared Stidham, Frankie. It was kind of weird, honestly, to me. I think we could all tell after that it was Sean Payton really likes Jared Stidham because wasn't he the second signing for the Broncos?
I'm so glad that he said himself that he was a priority signing, because I had so many people being like, he wasn't a priority signing. He signed. He was literally on the opening of free agency, which is when all these deals are supposed to go through. This man was the 4th deal. What? Yeah. That's weird, man. So yeah, no, I completely agree. It was kind of crazy.
It was crazy. Well, Zach and I were debating about this on the last episode, so I kind of want to get your opinion as well. Do you think that was a good signing value-wise, yes or no?
I haven't watched his tape yet from last year, so I don't really want to give too much of a grade on it, but he is so well-liked in NFL circles, it seems that is one thing that, wherever Stidham's gone so far, he's gotten the chance, and, he seems to be pretty well-liked by his coaches, despite what I think fans have seen so far out of him. But, I mean, hey, I was the one kind of talking before free agency opened about how I wouldn't hate going for one of these younger possible upside QB options that either can push Russell Wilson, or if you need to have a guy that can start a few games, you can kind of jump to him and still get a decent evaluation of the offense. So I don't think it's an awful signing. Again, it's just so interesting. And I think the biggest thing is just kind of where do we continue to see the direction of this team go? And the draft is one of those places where I feel like the draft is one of the few times a year where you can really see what a team is trying to, obviously you can see what a team is trying to do and what they are trying to build, because they are literally grabbing the pieces. You can see what type of offense they're trying to run based on the type of personnel they grab. You can see the types of schemes they're trying to run and stuff. And I think that's going to be pretty telling this year on whether we see the Broncos kind of try to, again, more buy in or kind of backpedal a little bit on this Russell Wilson era investment, because again, something I've been been feeling this whole time is it feels like this team is kind of leaning towards the next page. They're looking to kind of turn the page sooner than later, in my opinion, based on a lot of these moves. But then I look at some of these moves and they kind of tell me the opposite.
Yeah.
Instead of it's one that makes me think that they're looking to maybe move on a little sooner. Sorry.
Cool. No, you're all good. And I want to. So we're going to move on to the actual topic of this episode before we do that, I kind of want to know your opinion on this.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll get into it. Or should I ask this after? I don't know. I'm just going to ask it now. What do you think the stage of the Broncos are in? And then we'll move into the reasons why. Do you think that this is a team trying to win now, or do you think this is a team trying to build a foundation, or where do you think they kind of stand?
I think it's trying to build the foundation. I really don't see this as a team we'll get into this when we kind of discuss the roster as a whole, but I don't see this as a team that's really trying to do everything they can to push for a playoff team, and I'm not trying to make that sound like a bad thing, but I think that they seem to be kind of making an organizational effort, it seems to reset a little bit, to kind of move off of this last chapter in the Broncos history, which was an unsuccessful one, definitely, and possibly look to move on to, I don't want to say next quarterback, because I think there is definitely the possibility that Russell Wilson performs well this year. But it seems like they aren't necessarily doing him a bunch of favors this year to let him show that. I think that they're trying to see if he can kind of bring this offense to another level. But I think the moves show that they kind of want this offense to be able to run regardless of who they have at quarterback so that Sean Payton can find his guy of the future. So I think it is kind of a very, like, I don't want to say a step back, but kind of like an adjusting of path, if you will.
Right. So, one thing, D. Bronx comes in, he says he feels like these moves are for the next quarterback, to be honest. One thing I kind of want to point out is that there was no real vets added to this room. There really wasn't. Even the re-signs, there was no real vets. There was no 28, 30-year-olds added to the team. You know what I mean, Frankie?
Hello?
No, you're good. You're good. You're good.
I can't hear anything. I don't know if – oh, shit. Did my headset die? That would make sense. My headset died. I feel like now.
Here you are. We're with technical difficulties, everybody.
Complete technical botchery. All right.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can completely hear you. I'm sorry. I was just talking over you, huh? I was like,
you're like waving, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. All right, perfect. Let's move on to the next section here. The first one I kind of want to hit on, Frankie, is the offensive line room. The graphic says, how does the left guard situation compare to 2022? But first, and then we'll move into the guard. How much of an upgrade is the offensive line? Obviously, they added Ben Powers and Mike McGlinchey. They paid him a ton, though. Dalton Reisner wasn't on a big deal. Cam Fleming wasn't on a big deal. Do you think the money spent was worth it? Do you think it's enough of improvement to say I'm spending all this money on that?
So if you're just looking at the offensive line, yes, I think that the money that they spent will improve this unit. Obviously, I think Lloyd Cushenberry limits it possibly a little bit, but I think that this is definitely a better unit going forward. I will say, and this is kind of something I think we're going to see top to bottom, that they still can resolve. They still have draft picks. There's still plenty of time to add veterans, to add pieces. I'm sure they're going to do plenty of that. There is not nearly as much depth this year at the tackle spot or really anywhere along the offensive line as there was a year ago. They just had a couple more pieces. Last year they signed, I think, 3 tackles. They signed Billy Turner. They signed Tom Compton, who was a ghost. They signed
Bigfoot.
They signed Cam Fleming eventually. Right, he was Bigfoot. Where I'm not going to pretend any of those guys were great, but they at least had bodies in the room where right now, if, any of these guys along the offensive line, that I think for the first time in a while, when you look at their 5-man unit, I don't think there's any super weak link. I'm kind of being a little friendly, I think, in my personal opinion of Lloyd there, where I think Lloyd is a little bit of a weaker link, but I think with the better pieces around him, he can be a little bit better, hopefully with an additional year. Because one thing I will say about center that's worried me, and this is something I think about with them possibly drafting a center is one of those positions, like you hear about like quarterback, or I'm sorry, not like quarterback, like tight end, where it's like, it kind of takes until that year 3 or 4 for a guy to kind of come online and learn the position, because it is just one of the tougher positions in the NFL. So, and there's a lot of mental stuff to it too, where like a lot of the communication stuff, like learning how to, communicate protections to the rest of the offensive line, like things like that are usually things that a center is tasked with coming into the NFL that he just kind of has to pick up pretty quickly. So I am a little skeptical of them going a rookie, where I don't want to say I'd rather Lloyd, but like, it wouldn't shock me, like if they do go, say, one of the top tackles at like the top centers at 67 and have him compete with Lloyd. I won't be shocked if Lloyd wins that competition. And that's not me saying I think that he's better than the other center. I just think having the experience in the NFL means so much for a center. So I kind of wish that they would have ended up going a veteran there, but I do think that the offensive line as a whole will be upgraded in 2022. If it'll be worth it, I think that'll be a question for next year.
Yeah, and I kind of want to add on to your point there with the center, Frankie. Everyone is like, it feels like everyone's so convinced that this upgrade at center is coming through the draft in year 1. I think an eventual upgrade can come through the draft if you drafted a center this year. Mm-hmm. But putting your eggs in the basket of this 21-year-old is going to be this 20-year-old is going to be my starting center for the Denver Broncos this season is insane. The Broncos don't even have a first-round pick. So if the Broncos go in there, or a second-round pick, if the Broncos go in there and they draft a center and that guy ends up proving himself in camp that he's the best guy, I agree. But putting my eggs in the basket and being so hopeful that the center we're going to draft in the third round is going to be the guy right out the gate. Offensive line perfect is insane to me. That's something that I can't wrap my head around. I hate to say it, but the bar is set kind of low at Lloyd Cushenberry. The center can be better than Lloyd Cushenberry and still not be good at the end of the day. That's just kind of where I stand. The Broncos, I find it hard to believe, truthfully, that the Broncos go into this draft a center with their first pick in this draft, and that guy is a really good center this year. That's not something I really see, truthfully.
It's interesting, man, because like again, like I'm not trying to beat up on Lloyd, but like the tape last year was rough, and he ended up getting like legitimately benched, like, you know, or no, he got hurt, but like, you know, like it seemed like he was on the verge of getting benched. You know, it seemed like he wasn't really having a good camp, and there was kind of talks that Graham Glasgow was possibly going to win the job. Like, this is a guy who struggled throughout his first few years, and Sean Payton hasn't been here, you know, where it's kind of like, it is a little interesting that it seems like Lloyd has, I don't want to say been handed the job, but has kind of already gotten like an early grasp on that job when, like, you know, he hasn't really put forth evidence that he's earned it, I'd say, so far. But I mean, like you said, I am also just like, I'm so hesitant to give it to a rookie. And as Colton said in the chat right here, I mean, such a big part of it is the coaching aspect. And I mean, something that's a big thing that I've pointed out, or like that's been pointed out for like these linemen of the past couple of years, is this will be their third offensive line coach in 3 years. For when we're talking about, you know, when we're talking about like Quinn Miners, when we're talking about these guys that have been here for a little bit, like, it's just ridiculous the turnover that they've had to deal with, and that's so much adjustment. And I mean, a big thing with Lloyd too that I do want to, just the last point I want to make on him is like, this is going to be a downhill running team. This is going to be a team that's going to be running a lot more power stuff, where like it's going to be obvious quickly if he's the problem. You know, I think that's going to be one thing that's going to be telling right away, because last year, weeks like 1 through 5, like they were having major issues running between the tackles, and a big part of it was because of him. So, you know, I am curious to see how long of a leash he'll be given if they don't end up getting someone that's going to be true competition. Because I think they did end up adding, I can't remember what his name is, but they ended up adding someone who was like a backup on the Seahawks and the Texans for a couple of years.
Fuller,
yeah, Kyle Fuller, the other Kyle Fuller.
D-Bronx comes in the chat. He says, kind of sad that nobody's even thinking about Wattenberg competing for the job when that's kind of what he was drafted for. Do you think that Wattenberg can compete for that job, Frankie?
I mean, anything is possible, I guess, but like, I don't really think so. I think Wattenberg was more drafted for the scheme they wanted to run last year, and now they're running something completely different, and he's kind of a fish out of water. It's kind of tough for him because last year he just got thrown all around. They just ended up putting him in positions he'd never played before and doing a whole bunch of terrible things to that guy. So all of his tape isn't very good. But like, yeah, I think he's got a very uphill battle with the fact that, I mean, this is just not the scheme that he wants to be playing in.
And then another thing I want to ask you, Frankie, is what do you think about the depth through the offensive line? Is there anyone that stands out to you?
It's scary, man. I mean, so Quinn Bailey is still here. Quinn Bailey is pretty much like the only. It's like Quinn Bailey, Luke Wattenberg, and then like I think Will Sherman's gotten some snaps before. Isaiah Prince, I think they signed like after the season ended last year. He was like one of those like before like the season fully ended signings, but like it's a lot. Like, I mean, they can obviously still fill out, and I have a lot of people being like, oh, there's so much time left in the offseason still, but it's like, dude, when you look at the roster they had last year, they had depth last year at this point, you know? Like, they had Graham Glasgow as a backup, or they had guys like Moody. We're going to talk about him. They had Moody still. They had Calvin Anderson and Cam Fleming. They had multiple tackles that could have been playing that were still able to be depth. 1,000%. They do not have that right now. So we can – and the other thing that, you know, they don't have a lot of money left. I wish they did, but they only have like $7 million in cap and 5 draft picks, guys. Like, they don't have all the room in the world to fill all these positions of depth that I think that they are kind of lacking in.
So all encompassing, right? You mentioned that the Broncos, you think they're starting 5 there on the offensive line improved, but you also mentioned their depth has gotten worse. Which group would you rather have?
See, I think I'd probably prefer last year's, but before, like, I'd prefer last year's before Garrett Bowles got hurt, I think. And I think a big part of it is obviously the coaching as well. And I mean, that's kind of a little bit of a cheating answer, but I think like I think last year's offensive line obviously suffered so much from the impact of having the ineptitude of Butch Berry kind of leading them, like I'm, not trying to beat his drum too hard, but like from all the reports,
terrible.
Butch Berry was terrible. We watched regression across the board, literally across the board regression, like it was really tough to see, there was so many like seeming personal feuds with guys. It was just a kind of a ridiculous situation. So it's interesting because I think as a whole, the group they had last year was maybe a little bit better because I think like Dalton's still a fine guard. I think, I don't think he's great, but I think he's still an average enough guard. And I think this is something that, Zach always talks about, like, we always talk about. It's more about having 5 like average or, like playable offensive linemen than it is about having like 1 or 2 super good offensive linemen and then like some super weak links. It's a unit, right? It's literally a unit. So I think last year's unit was probably a little better, and I think I'd probably go with last year's unit. But for what they're trying to run this year, these bodies probably make a little bit more sense.
Do you think okay, all right. If we're talking starters, do you think this offensive line room is the number 1 upgraded position, or is there another room that on the team across the Denver Broncos roster? Do you feel like there's another position that you feel more comfortable with this offseason in consideration now?
It kind of has to be because, like, as much as it sucks, the injuries that took place last year just make it so hard because there really haven't been a ton of other position groups I'd say that got added to. I think they're much more kind of relying on guys to come back and kind of just like having the pieces already there. But I mean, I think easily the offensive line is probably the group that I'd say got the most better.
Right. Yes. I totally agree with you there. The issue with this offensive line, Frankie, and you mentioned this, is you said the 5 offensive line, you'd rather have 5 average offensive line than 2 great offensive linemen and 3 bad ones. That's just how you would rather have it be. If an injury does happen, the offensive line could tank. That's kind of my issue there. Like I don't know who is the Netane Moody situation that happened last year is still disgusting. And it's
dude, he would have been wonderful in this scheme too, guys. I think that's one of the saddest things with what they're moving towards. Netane Moody would have been awesome to have for depth or even to compete for that starting spot if they had but yeah.
Totally. Okay, so let's think. Like maybe you move Quinn Miners to center in a situation like this, right? Moody could play guard, something. I don't know. There's different situations you could do, but I would still love to have Moody on this team. And the fact that they lost him out because it felt like he just didn't want to be a Bronco anymore. I kind of blame Butch Berry for that situation.
I blame Butch Berry. It's completely Butch Berry.
Yeah. It's a shame. It's very much a shame. And it tells you how important these positional coaching things are.
He was great against the Chiefs in that game last year.
Yeah. Nobody liked Butch Berry. From what I hear, nobody liked Butch Berry.
Nobody liked Butch Berry.
So I don't know. That's a scary situation. What do you think? Do you think they got worse at any position throughout their roster this year? And if so, which one?
I mean, again, the injuries I think will play a really big role in it. I think right now you can say the running back room is probably a little bit worse. Last year we had Javonte Williams coming in completely healthy, looking like he was about to tear up the entire league, and we all didn't think Melvin Gordon was terrible. Whereas now, again, I think we all like the Samaje P. Ryan signing, but I think he's kind of the only guy we can say right now is 100%. Javonte Williams, there's conflicting reports coming out all the time, but I'm kind of leaning towards I'd like them to take as much time as possible. Javonte Williams is an incredibly special talent, and I would really like to see him get the opportunity to rest him. There's no reason to rush him back. This team has sadly been pretty bad for 7 years, so there's no reason. It's not like, we're racing to win a Super Bowl right now or anything. Let's let Javonte Williams get fully healthy. So I think you can say the running back room got a little bit worse. The defensive line depth-wise is pretty bad, I'd say, this year. I'll be honest. I think a lot of the team kind of is just worse depth-wise straight up right now. They can still make a lot of signings, as I'm saying, but just point blank, the corner room I'd say is worse right now just because you're literally going from having it's 3 of the same top 4, and you're just replacing Ronald Darby, who we agree is a very, very good number 2 corner, with Trayvon Smith, who's fine for what he is, but he's not He's not going to be what Ronald Darby was. So I'd say that room got a little bit worse. Same with safety too, where like, again, I'm very excited for what Caden Stearns can be this year, and I completely believe in him. But when we're talking about like, this is a room that has like 4 of the 5 safeties they had last year. So you're literally just taking out one of them. And, something you've heard from all the guys that you guys have gotten to interview on LTB, the safety room loves Kareem Jackson. Kareem Jackson is one of like the key leaders, key veterans on this team who helps it go.
Even the offensive guys, I'll throw in.
It's great. K-Jack TV fans love Kareem Jackson. Like Kareem Jackson is one of the heart and souls of this team. So like I think that's a really big loss. So I'd say the safety room got a little bit worse. So I'd say a decent I'd say probably like 5 position groups probably got a little bit worse.
Okay, but damn, that's a lot. That's a lot of positions.
Maybe that's too many. Maybe like 5.
No, but I really don't disagree with you, Frankie, especially when I'm considering depth, right? This is football.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most physical sport ever. Like,
and this is a team that's endured a ton of injuries. Sorry.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And injuries are bound to happen. They really are in the NFL. They're just going to happen. It's just part of it's the nature of the sport. And it's really who you have to fill in. And like that's really a big deal. It really is. So it scares me that the Broncos don't have a lot of quality depth. I'm kind of excited that some of these young players are going to get more of an opportunity to play, like a Caden Stearns, like a PJ Locke at safety. There's certain guys that I'm excited to get that opportunity. Wazarike is interesting still to me. He struggled a little last year, but he's still interesting. He still has these traits I like. There's different guys throughout the Broncos roster that if an injury did come out, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be interested in what you do. I just don't have a lot of confidence in you can be the starter. To this question, Colton Cooper says corner for sure. That's a position I kind of want to hit on too, Frankie, real quick with you. Do you think the Broncos still could add to the corner room?
Oh, yeah.
Or do you think it's kind of
when you look at so this is something that George Payton again does a wonderful job of this, and we've seen this pretty much every single year. I don't think you can really look at the roster right now and say that there's a definitive you need to draft this. Right. I'd say he's done a pretty good job of putting a warm body at every single position across the roster. But I'd say if there was one that you could say is their need, it's probably outside corner. They're a little bit shallow there. I love Damari Mathis. I think I was the original Damari Mathis stan. I'm so glad to see him get the opportunity to be their CB2 this season. But they don't have a CB4 really right now, I'd say. And I think that's a very important position, especially nowadays when you're going up against teams like the Chiefs. As you're always going to hear me talk about, this is a team that's going to be in a lot of, a lot of dime looks. They're going to be playing a lot of 5 and 6 DB looks where they are going to need corners galore, and they're going to need guys that can keep up and guys that can play. And right now they don't necessarily have that. I'd say they have 2 proven outside guys, maybe 1.5, maybe 1 1/3 nickels that they can play, depending upon what your thoughts are on Isang Bassi. So they have Surtain, Damari, and they have Kwan. Outside of that, I think they could definitely add another body, and this is the class to do it. It's a really good corner class, but corner for sure, I think, is the one that they're going to look to add to through the draft.
It's kind of funny, Frankie. I hate being super negative. I really do. But so many positions, is it the Broncos will fill that through the draft? Hey, guys, here's the situation. The Broncos only have a third. They don't have a first or second round
pick. And they have 5 picks total, right?
Yes. So unless we're going to fill all of these positions in the 6th and 7th, and that's what you're kind of banking on, the Broncos just don't have the picks to go out there and fill all these needs, even in a very, optimistic. Mm-hmm. If I'm looking at it optimistically, the Broncos are still going to be weak at some positions depth-wise. They just are. That's kind of where we are right now with the Broncos, unless they go out there and sign some vets. That's another interesting thing. The Broncos haven't signed any vets, really. Mm-hmm. They really haven't. Everyone's kind of in that peaking era, and that's kind of what I think why the Broncos are maybe looking at next year's team. This is the foundation, not just this year's team, but the year after that's team.
Yeah. Well, and that's mentioned, just to touch on the draft, too, is they don't really have many picks to trade down with, too. I think a lot of people kind of there's this thought process that George Payton will be able to trade down and accumulate a ton of extra assets, which, don't get me wrong, he might be able to do so. But like when you're trading down from pick 67 or pick 68, you know, you're not going to be grabbing as many picks as you would if you were trading from a second or a first round pick. This isn't going to be him picking up like, oh, he got like multiple day 3 picks. You know, he might be able to, but like I really don't think he's going to be able to get the value I think a lot of people are hoping for and be able to build up a ton of draft capital.
Right. No, I totally agree with you. And okay, so here's the thing. I feel like we've been negative enough. What do you think the strongest position on this team is?
Strongest position. I'd say it's probably receiver. I think with the ascension we saw to Jerry Jeudy last season, I think if they are able to maintain Courtland Sutton, which I hope they'll do, and I think, you know, we've kind of started to – I think that he could kind of have a better year this season playing with a Russ that looks a little bit better in an offense that's a little bit better structured. Jerry's just becoming a superstar before our eyes. And I think Tim Patrick is the perfect type of Sean Payton wide receiver that if he can come back from injury and be an impact player, Marquez Callaway is a signing I think we both like. Hopefully KJ Hamler can be available by the time that Peck recovers. I think this receiver room is probably the strongest unit on this team right now.
I agree with you. I think so I feel like we have to kind of put a question mark next to Tim Patrick's name at the moment, just because he's returning off of injury, right? I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket and say Tim Patrick is going to be exactly how we left him before that injury. But the Tim Patrick we saw before that injury, I thought I had a hot take on the Let's Talk Broncos show at that time. I thought he was the best receiver on the team. I really did. At that time when he was playing, Jerry Jeudy now is going to make a case for that for sure, over what Tim Patrick was at that time. But Tim Patrick is a phenomenal football player. If he comes out and is that guy, it really feels like it's a huge swing position for the Broncos. And when I say swing position, I'm talking about it could be really bad or really good, and it could very much change the trajectory of the team. And I'm not ruling out any of the possibilities or anywhere in between.
Yeah,
I'm really not, because Courtland Sutton could come out and look like the 2 years removed from injury, like the player we saw before the injury, the athletic freak, the physically dominant guy. That is a possibility. Tim Patrick could just return and be that guy we saw before. Jerry Jeudy could ascend. But the key word there is could, right? I don't have any solids there. It's a weird position for the Broncos. But, Frankie, I do think it is – I agree with you in that I think it's the most talented position on the team. If another position similar to that, in my opinion, is kind of edge. It is. If I'm just looking straight at talent on the roster, the Broncos have a ton of talent at edge. It's just I want to see it proven. Right, Randy Gregory is a phenomenal football player when he's on the field. Baron Browning's high-end flashes are great. Nick Bonito was a second-round pick. I think Jonathan Cooper is a serviceable football player, and I think Jacob Martin in a third down situation, if I wanted to throw a guy in and get after the passer, I'm also happy with him. It's just those ifs. What do you think about the edge position for the Broncos right now?
No, I mean, man, Randy Gregory, man, it's crazy going back and watching him because, like, I genuinely he might be one of those like truly what if careers in NFL history, not NFL history, but like of the last like couple eras. Cause this is just an incredibly freakish talented player. When this guy is healthy, he's legitimately a top 10 talented pass rusher. There are not many guys that can do the variety of things that he can do. So like, but at the same time, he only played like 5 games last year. I acknowledge that he only played like 5 or 6 games last year. And everyone was telling Broncos fans as we went into last season, oh, well, he's not going to play that many games. We already saw it with the Cowboys however many times. And it sucks because it really is just like you said, it's just such a massive question mark where you don't really know, like, are they going to have this incredible difference maker, game wrecker of a player, guy that has to be accounted for on every single snap, or is he not going to be is he going to be unavailable for the majority of the season? And then when you talk about Baron Browning, like, man, if he can continue taking steps forward, he seems to be like another great difference maker for them, great impact player, but like another guy that has a little bit of health concerns that we hope can have the ability to stay on the field. Is he going to be able to improve against the run? Are we going to be able to see Bonito kind of take a step forward against the run? We heard Sean Payton talking about him, where that I guess is my one concern about the room. And I do kind of wonder if that's another position that they could look to add another like veteran possibly. I don't know. But, like, I completely agree where they have all the talent in the world. And from a pass rushing standpoint, especially, like, this is a group that can get after the passer. It's just a question of how available are they all going to be throughout the season, and can they continue to get better to kind of maximize their athletic traits?
Yeah, Frankie, I totally agree with you. I think that, and I'm going to kind of lead the conversation to this. So I think the position, if we're looking at it from last year's standpoint, the Broncos obviously had Bradley Chubb in the room, right? So it has gotten a little worse from where it was at the beginning of last year, correct?
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. 100%. It's like when you watch that Seahawks game and like the things they were able to do on third down, even though they ended up losing that game, like that the pass rush they had, or even the San Francisco game, like, dude, they were a terror for offensive lines. And like, I'm not gonna, they were an absolute terror. And you can even throw Draymond Jones into the like quote unquote edge list, since he moved all over their defensive line. And when they ended up losing Bradley Chubb, they were putting him on the outside. So like, I completely agree. I think the unit was better last year, just point blank.
All right, so I'm going to ask you as a whole. We've gone through a ton of positions here. Which roster do you like more? Last year's Denver Broncos or this year's Denver Broncos?
I think dude, the injuries make it so hard because I'm probably going to go with last year's. Just because I think the excitement of a Javonte Williams going into that season, I think you had the secondary kind of still being so full of both veteran and potential, like the idea, like looking back on it, having Ronald Darby and Damari Mathis as your 2 and your 4 is such a cool option because you both have the veteran leadership of a guy like Darby and K'Wan Williams. And then you have these youth guys getting to learn from these guys.
People forget how good
PS2 and Damari
too. People forget how good Darby was. When he was on the field, he was a damn good corner.
Dude, and people don't respect him in general for what he's been. I mean, that's a guy he's won a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so
I would probably go with last year's roster.
And that's considering we're going into last year, right?
Yeah, and this is before the draft, too, so who knows? Maybe they make some incredible moves in the draft. I end up loving it. I don't know if that's really too possible because of all the players that they lost that were, like, just so good. But, I mean, as I think we've kind of pointed out, it feels intentional by the team a little bit, No,
totally. And it feels, Frankie, like to me, whenever this conversation is brought up online, right? Which roster is better? Everyone's giving a lot of pushback to the idea that that last year's roster was better. And here's the holdup. This is the miscommunication, is that people are looking at last year's rosters with the injury. I think the people that are saying last year's roster was better are going into the season and looking at the roster start to bottom of the players they had. Ronald Darby is included in that. Bradley Chubb is included in that. These are guys that are really good football players when they're on the field. And that's kind of what I think makes the difference. I'm not going to say the beat up Broncos are worse than this year's, right? I don't, or would you, I'm not saying that the week 12 Broncos are better than.
And I'm also not saying, and I think another thing we're also not saying is we're not saying like, oh, they should have paid Bradley Chubb and not gotten Sean Payton, or they, like they needed to keep Draymond Jones, even though I totally think they could have and they definitely should have. But, like, we're not necessarily saying things like that either. And I think another part of it, too, is like where the team is at. Last year, this was a team thinking we just got Russell Wilson. We're about to be one of the like 4 or 5 teams that actually are contending for the Super Bowl trophy at the end of the year. This year, they're saying, oh my God, Russell Wilson might actually not be very good, and we gave him $250 million. Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. And now they're trying to figure it out. Like these are 2 different teams.
That alone will make a huge difference.
Right. Where, to be honest, we're like, yes, on paper, I'd say that if they were to play a game, I think last year's week 1 Broncos probably beat this year's week 1 Broncos. But acknowledging where Russell Wilson is right now, I wouldn't want them to be having a lot of the players they had last year, I guess, for this year's roster. Maybe that's actually wrong. Like, I don't know if you are paying to keep like a Ronald Darby if you're not sure what Russell Wilson is going forward, things like that, where it's like, obviously they would have been better, but it's not necessarily smart to have the better talent around when you aren't competing for anything right now, if that makes sense. Like, It's not tanking, but it's kind of like you'd rather give the young guys the opportunity.
Totally. Do you think this team has a chance at getting to the playoffs, Frankie, as it stands?
Dude, the AFC is hurricane. I'll be honest.
It's
Like,
ridiculous, yeah.
it's almost like two different questions. Do I think that the team can be like a playoff caliber team this year? Sure.
Yeah.
Do I think that they're going to be like the however many seeds there are? Do I think they're going to be like, beating out teams like the Chargers if what the coach they just hired, I can't think of their offense, but Kellen Moore ends up unlocking Justin Herbert to another level, and that's another contender with the Jets if they get Rodgers. The Dolphins have one of the most stacked rosters you're going to see. The Bengals look like they're super good. The Ravens might be able to get Lamar Jackson back. Like the AFC is a nightmare. Trevor Lawrence looks like he's only getting better. So like, I think this team could be playoff caliber, but when I really think about it, do I think that they'll be like a true playoff team, not just like a lucky maybe win getting into the wild card? Probably not. Like, I'd say I put it at like, I think they're going to need a hell of a year out of Russ. I think you need to see a Russ bounce back year, and that's kind of one of the good things about how they've set up the roster is you will know if Russell Wilson has returned to form based on how Denver does this year, I think.
Yeah, totally.
What do you think? Do you think they're a playoff team?
No. I'll be honest with you.
I'm so glad you were more abrupt with it. Let's go.
No, I don't. I really don't. Like I said earlier, I like the Broncos starting unit more than I did last year. I just think there's more to it.
Dude, you throw a wrench in any of these positions with an injury, it's gonna get dark.
Yeah, and I also, hot take here, guys, I really think that Sean Payton is looking at the year after this. I don't think Sean Payton is looking at this year from the moves they made. I keep bringing this up. Broncos haven't brought in any depth or vets. That's something that they just haven't done. It feels like they're building a foundation, even just looking at the players they've added, the ages they're at, stuff like that. It feels like the Broncos are going into this and, they're starting to build what we think it is a powerful and bully offense, but they're not there yet. I think that's kind of why you're not seeing this. Lloyd Cushenberry is the obvious starting center in Sean Payton's eyes at this point, right? Is because they don't think that there's a great upgrade out there right now, and they're not going to take the chance because they're not convinced that this is the year that they're going to the Super Bowl. I think that they're kind of just building the foundation. So I don't think that. I'm not going to put a win-loss on it right now. I'm really not. But do I think it's a playoff team? No, I don't. I think the Chargers are better. I think the Chiefs are better, and I think the Broncos and Raiders are going to be competing.
All right, Joey. Well, I'm gonna make you somewhat put a win-loss on it. The Vegas Sportsbook opened the Broncos at 8.5 wins on the season. So let's say billionaire guy, walks up to you. He's like, I'm going to give you $1 million. You got to put it on this ticket. You pick in the over or the under for 8.5 Broncos wins this season. And I think I will say it depends upon the opponents probably too. I will say I think they're playing the NFC North in the rotation if that helps at all. So probably not a super hard divisional opponent to pull.
Okay. 8.5, dude. I do not see the Broncos winning 9. I'm sorry. People are gonna hate me for this. I promise I'm not just hating. This is my actual opinion here. I'm slamming the under. Like I might. I'm not gonna say I'm gonna put a bet on it because it makes me sound crazy. But 8.5 sounds nuts to me. With the Broncos we saw last year, they've added Sean Payton, and it feels like they're in the midst of a huge transition right now.
Yes.
Huge transition. It doesn't feel like they're a win now team. 8.5 is nuts to me. I would go under.
They are changing head coach, all 3 coordinators. Like, this is the thing, too. We always talk about this. Like, it's crazy because, guys, I love Sean Payton. Like, Sean Payton is a really, 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 really good coach. But, there still needs to be some acknowledgement of, man, when a team undergoes this much turnover, there's usually some you're going to see some, I'm not going to say problems because I don't want to make it sound like problems, but there's always going to be a little bit of a growing period. There's going to be a little bit of some shift and a little bit of turnover. We've just kind of endured it so much recently that I think the fact that there's a good coach in the building kind of makes it feel like that period might get skipped. But I think the big thing is just kind of having realistic expectations about what the season should be. We want to see flashes of hopeful things going forward, I think, this year. I think that's kind of the most important thing. If you want to see, I think it should be more invested into personal players. I want to see Patrick Surtain continue to be the best corner in football. I want to see Jerry Jeudy have a true breakout season, 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns.
You
That would
want
be
to
sick.
yes.
Like,
yes. You want to
it's
see
not-
some of these depth pieces that are younger step in and be serviceable as depth pieces, or maybe even further than that.
Yeah.
You want to see Caden Stearns be a starting safety.
Preach.
You want to see Henningsen or Wazirike be a rotational defensive lineman. These are the type of things that I feel like would be a win for the Broncos this year.
Right, because like as much as it sucks, like with where they currently are with the Russ thing, like again and again, I mean, I just think the biggest thing is what ends up happening with Russ. Because maybe it will be that Russ ends up looking like a top 5 quarterback this year, and this is a team that ends up going like 13-4 and walking into the playoffs. And we're both completely wrong. Let me tell you, I'll eat that wrong. I will eat that wrong like I've never eaten a wrong before. I will be so happy. If this team is 13-4 and Russell Wilson's throwing behind the back 4 touchdown games, you know, the Chiefs are we're up on the Chiefs in the division in late December or some shit, I'll be losing my mind, guys. You know, I'll eat all the crow on the planet. I'm just saying, realistically, I don't know if that's where the team is at. They seem to understand that. And if that's not where the team is at, it doesn't really help them too much to go like 9-8 this year. It probably helps them a little bit more, honestly, to go like a 6-10, but have some flashes of potential and maybe continue on this path of a rebuild than to say, oh man, are we like almost there and we should keep pushing to try to make this thing work? Or should we kind of continue to go on our own path? Because I mean, man, it could be really tough if this team goes like 9-7. Russell Wilson looks like a mediocre quarterback, like the 16th best quarterback in the league. And now they decide to keep him for another couple of years. Like that could be a tough world to live in, guys, where Denver's just living in a world of mediocrity then.
Bill hops in the chat, Frankie, and he says, Bucks getting drilled, Frankie, by the way.
I told Joey, I was like, I'm missing the Bucks Celtics game. I'm not happy about it. So great.
Bill, what's the score? Bill, what's the score? Please hop in the chat and say that. But Frankie, any final thoughts on this Broncos roster? Anything you just want to get off your chest before we get out of here?
Yeah, now I'm just thinking about the Bucks.
I have an Embiid take. Embiid isn't that guy. He ducked Jokic. I was literally DMing Frankie the weekend of, and I was like, dude, why can't people just appreciate the MVP?
Down 34. Oh my God.
Oh. No, I was DMing Frankie talking about, dude, I just hate how toxic it's gotten. Everyone should be appreciated. All 3 of these guys are deserving. And then Embiid missed that matchup, and false alarm. We're off of that.
We're
I'm
off
part of that toxic stuff now. I'm not on the Embiid train at all. Giannis or Jokic all day. That's what we're doing. 100-61 is crazy.
We're not gonna talk about it. It's been a rough week. It's been a rough week. They're just getting ready for the playoffs. Maybe some people are sitting. I don't know. It is I think it's a back-to-back. I think they played the Pistons last night. Who's the top scorer right now? Giannis is playing.
He said Embiid did drop 50 on Jokic's head last time. He definitely did, but Embiid hasn't played Jokic in Denver since 2019.
Listen, here's all that matters.
Let's talk about it.
Embiid, I mean, Embiid needs to focus on the rings because Embiid has a squad around him. I think this is what kind of makes the MVP argument in my time. Sorry, we're going on a little bit of an NBA tangent right here.
Yeah, let's do it.
If Jokic had the roster that Embiid's gotten to have and the all-stars that Embiid has gotten to play with for the last few years,
let's talk about it.
Jokic is probably winning a title easily. Jokic is probably. And I'm saying as a Bucks fan, I'm watching Embiid get to play with James Harden and lose to like the Heat in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Like I'm watching Jokic have like a 6-deep roster. Like I'm watching Jeff Green be the best player off this team's bench and punch on my boy Giannis. I'm like, what the hell is going on over here? I thought this man retired back when 2K9 came out.
Yeah, no, 2K9. Jeff Green has those LeBron genetics. He's just not good. He has great genetics, though. If Jeff Green was real, like he would be aging great if he was good. But anyways, Frankie, any final words before we get out of here?
Not really. We got 3 episodes until the draft, so that's pretty exciting. We'll be finishing up like our pre-draft stuff. So, we'll probably do like a mock in there or something for the Broncos, and that'll be pretty hype. But outside of that, nothing really. Go follow me on the Twitter, Frankie's Film, TikTok, Frankie's Film NFL. I do a podcast with the Irish Goons Irish NFL show. Go check that out. Got to interview Sam Monson today from PFF. That was pretty sick. Got to ask him some cool questions about like the Chargers, Hendon Hooker, the tight end class. It was a good time. So, go check that out. Make sure you're checking out LTB and all Let's Talk Broncos, Let's Talk Draft content. We will be coming at you all the time. And where can they find your stuff, Joey?
Yeah, everybody, just make sure please, if anyone's listening and you're not subscribed to the Let's Talk Broncos YouTube, do it immediately, please. And if you're watching through Twitter, please go to the Let's Talk Broncos Twitter and watch it, or the Let's Talk Broncos YouTube and watch it through there. Those views bring more money, and they're just apparently more valuable. We learned this like a couple months ago.
I wish I had a metal pipe. I'd be threatening people with a metal pipe right now.
Yeah.
You better go subscribe, or there will be a Frank beating you with a metal pipe.
So please go do that. I'm working on a video. I'm taking my time on it because I want it to be really good. I have a cool little thumbnail together I made. I'm just spending my time on this one. I heard your guys' feedback. The reviews were good on the first one, but I also heard the feedback, and I want to make sure I can get in the groove of creating really good quality content for everybody. So yeah, make sure you're keeping an eye out for that. I'm going to keep everybody updated through this podcast or through Twitter, whatever the case is. Thank you everybody for joining the chat. It was a fun one, but until next time, guys, go Broncos.